welcome to Roadmap 2023, our election issues and personalities tracking program. I am Ladi Akeredoluwale. Thanks for joining us. My guest on the program today is of the view that Nigeria's system of government is not responsible for some of the shenanigans witnessed during the 2023 general elections. My guest also says decentralizing the electoral management process to states and local governments is a bad idea. Roadmap 2023 talks to the Executive Director of the Electoral College Nigeria, Mr. Kunle Lawal. Kunle Lawal, thank you for your time. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure always to be here.
Now, I want to start from an unusual angle. I mean, even though our conversation is mainly about the elections, but I want to ask you if in your own assessment, in your view, you've looked at things and it does appear as if perhaps our system of government is having a somewhat not altogether positive impact on our electoral process. And what do I mean? What I mean is that because we operate the presidential system of government, it seems to be a winner-take-all thing. And that introduces a certain level of desperation to be amongst the winners, not amongst the losers, because losers end up with nothing. And therefore, that desperation translates into all the shenanigans that we witness during the electoral process. Does this make any sense to you? Is it a viable argument that that system of government has that kind of impact?
Okay, the doubts that have been around democracy in Nigeria have always come from the fact that, first and foremost, our legislature, being at state level, at local government level, which is councillors, and then also at federal level, has been far, far below par. Because of that, it seems everything is executive. This also is key to also bringing up the root problem, which is, of course, constituency projects, which everybody in the electorate looks up to the legislature for, which are not even constitutionally backed. So we run a system where the electorate only expects executive functions and people go into office only planning for executive functions. So it makes it look like the presidential system in Nigeria is all about executive functions. When you look at other democracies across the world, India, US, you would find out Australia, you find out there's emphasis in trying to see who voted what in the legislature, what they were thinking on things from gun control to security, and holding those people accountable, not the president, on such decisions being made, even money being spent on education. But Nigeria right now has an executive mindset, and I think we inherited this from the military. Till we get over that, it will always seem a little skewed towards an executive function and not a presidential system.
Many people who just heard you talk about, we inherited it from the military. Essentially, what you're referring to is that under military, where we were for a very, very long time, you have executive functions, you have judicial functions. The difference between the military and the civilian administration was this legislature that you're talking about, which was not present under the military. But does it also say something about how we have put the system in place in such a way that the legislature seems to have taken a back seat in some states? Some have gone as far as to say that they are actually in the pocket of the governor, which means that they are not. You can't talk about the legislature in the sense that you are saying.
Yes, it's highly shocking that that part. And there's something critical to note. If you look at our military time, you would also understand that they had caretaker chairmen for local government. And Algon was more active under the military than they are under
the civilian
administration, which is quite a very serious anomaly. And when you look at it, you'd ask yourself the critical question, what exactly is going on? Well, the powers of the executive governors have grown because we've created a culture around politics, not actually the way the system works. So a governor does not have jurisdiction over the legislature or the local governments. What they did was that they noticed quite a lacuna in the constitution where it's not mentioned that the local government is autonomous, and they decided to play on it and kidnap the local government into their pockets. They are doing so, they also kidnapped the state legislature. Nobody talks about FAC allocations which goes to local governments. Nobody talks about councillors making decisions within the local government so that the local government chairman can act. Nobody talks about these conversations. And this is because we also, as a people, are mainly politically illiterate. So we spend quite a lot of time bothering about Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President. And therein lies the major problem. I think the key point is the education of Nigerians who assume politics is just shouting this party and that party and nothing else.
But that then brings to mind what happened. I mean, you know, it tended to pass by almost without mention because it happened in the run-up to the election, which incidentally was the constitutional amendment which the president signed that gave autonomy to the state legislatures and the judiciary. The local government, of course, was allegedly autonomous all along. And I use the word allegedly because, as you say, not really. I mean, when we come to it, they are not. But again, do you think that perhaps those amendments, which are now law, may have a positive impact on the kind of, you know, relationship that has developed between the legislators and the executive, particularly at the state and, you know, and levels below that?
Well, for me, the local government autonomy was thrown out by states because, you know, after the president has signed, it still has to go to State House of Assemblies, and states like Lagos rejected it, and a few other states. We wonder why. But the legislature was granted its autonomy. Now, the problem is that I do not see any difference occurring, and here is why. The quality of the people in state assemblies are not good enough to be in state assemblies. You don't have bills being passed by most of them. The average bill being passed. So what you have is executive bills coming from the executive governor down into the state house, which is passed by the state and the celebrates, which is quite a circus if you look at it. But, you know, individually, you don't see anyone in State House of Assembly campaigning based on bills. I'm going to propose this when we get into this. We're going to push for this law in this state. Or I'm behind the Child Rights Act. I'm behind this. You don't hear that. All you hear is, I'm going to give you road. I'm going to give you water. And that is not the job of the legislature till we get that. So we have the wrong people. It's like expecting, let's say, a woman is about to have a kid, and you approve for your mechanic to to conduct the operation. That's the situation we have with the legislature in Nigeria, State House of Assembly and lower cadres. And it's funny because we even go as far as still appointing speakers within the local government. But we yet don't think that councillors are legislative. It's quite a funny...
Yeah, but again, I want to perhaps pursue the argument that you mentioned a bit earlier, perhaps in passing, where you said most of us are politically illiterate. Most of the time, people talk about holding leaders to account, good governance, but mostly these are just cliches. They've come to just be cliches because in terms of what they really mean, given our process, very few people are doing it, other than people like yourselves in civil society and so on. The rest of us are mostly seeing these things on TV, and then during the run-up to elections, we get inundated with advertorials and so on, and, you know, asking people to vote this way or that way. And once that circus is ended, we move on back with our normal lives until the next, you know, circus. This has gone on now for almost a quarter of a century, since 1999. What is it that perhaps is missing?
For me, first, I'd like to point out, you can't engage what you don't understand. There's the false assumption of politics. And, you know, a lot of people make these mistakes. Even the fact, let's start with Nigeria. Nigeria picks or appoints people within the university caucus. I grew up within a university caucus, and you know, to handle specifics. I can tell you they don't know what the local government chairman does. They don't know what a House of Rep does or a Senate. And they're the ones dictating how votes go and how votes don't go. Now, back to the political illiteracy in Nigeria. You can ask the average party member what even his constitution states. Now, it is common knowledge that everybody says parties don't have ideology. That's also not true. Parties have ideology. But you don't expect me, after I've given you 100 million for a campaign form, I've paid delegates to get my primaries, I've hustled with my money to get to winning the office, then I should follow what the party says? Nah, that doesn't work. Where that works is where parties raise people. So even within parties, you have people that are politically illiterate. The electorate, all they want to see things from is whether you are from Eastern Nigeria, Western Nigeria, or Northern Nigeria, or they would look at the Christian, Muslim, or they would find there's always something is in rotary with me. It's more a sentimental, emotional bias. If you ask most supporters, clearly, even in, let's say, the recently concluded elections, that's the articulated, the batifieds, and the obedience, and the hosts of the 13 or 14 others. If you ask them, okay, what's your candidate's position on, let's say, healthcare? You don't have an answer. What's your candidate's position on security? His position is clear. He will end insecurity. That's not good enough. And most people don't even, I can tell you, of the entire population we have that can read, I don't think up to 6% has read the Electoral Act. They just know there's a new signed Electoral Act, and everybody jumps about it. You can virtually just go into, and I'm quite on social media, so you can walk into any social media room and just say anything and say it's in the Electoral Act, and you have a horde of followers believing that that's true, repeating it in different places, be it bars, be it hair salons, and etc. And then you have the situation where you just find out, generally in Nigeria, we all don't know anything. It's just a total confusion or mayhem. This particular course we have at the Electoral College Nigeria, which is Myths and Realities of Politics. And when we talk about these things, and we give them like, okay, do you know that constituency projects are not constitutional? And people start to argue and prove it. Do you know that local government chairman doesn't have immunity? These are simple basics where you have to walk people through. Even in the most intelligent community in Etiosa, some people did not know, and I had this conversation preceding elections, and this was with the highbrow community of Etiosa, and people did not know you could vote different parties on a ballot. They assumed once you vote one party, for it to be valid, you must vote the same party downstairs. And it's quite a problem.
So it comes to the issue of political awareness, and organizations such as yours have taken it upon themselves. That is because I can only assume that the gap is there and nobody is doing it. The political parties, who are supposed to be the vehicles for people to get to power, are not doing it. INEC isn't doing it. The National Orientation Agency is not doing it. Other people who ordinarily you would expect would have an interest in this, making people politically literate, understand the process, are not doing it. And yet, at the end of the day, when the electoral process, is less than absolutely stellar, we all express surprise and we all complain. Now, I'm wondering if we're not all being a bit hypocritical about this, because we haven't put in place the system that will make people have an investment in the electoral process and therefore be part of ensuring that it has a positive outcome. So why do we expect 2019 to be different from 2023 or in that respect?
I think there's a part of the puzzle, which is the African lust for power, that is missing in this puzzle you just created. The status quo generally doesn't want anybody to be politically illiterate so that the circus continues. If you improve the level of political literacy, you're going to improve the demand for good governance, and you're going to improve the demand for accountability. And the moment you do that, the status quo cannot remain as is. So you can't ask, for example, Pharaoh, you can't ask Pharaoh to teach the people of Israel how to walk out of Egypt. And that's the best way I'm going to put it.
I'm following what you're saying. But again, then, if we now come to because I set all this in the background before coming to the issue of the electoral process itself. If people don't understand who they're voting for, what that person is supposed to be doing as opposed to what he says he will be doing or she says she will be doing, and then at the end of the day, when they get into those offices, they don't perform. And then we all scream blue murder, expecting that something different will be the outcome. Why are we allowing this to continue? It does appear, though, that, from some of those like you that I've spoken to in the run-up and during the course of the 2023 elections, that something changed. Professor Wole Soyinka, the Nobel laureate, said, look, a mold was broken. and that is not going to go back. Whatever happens after this, we may not be able to say exactly what it will be, but it's not going to go back to what it was before this. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. For the first time in Nigeria, we have 5 different political parties within the gubernatorial system, and that's APC, PDP, NMPP, Labour, and ABGA, which is impressive. I think within the National Assembly, we have about 10 parties. Yeah, there are minorities that just have 1 or 2, but that's impressive. 8. You know, it was either or before. Now we have 8. I think the effect of a lot of work that's being done, the Electoral College, CGID, YAGA, enough is enough. A lot of people are really putting in energy into doing a lot of things to improve, you know, the systems. And, you know, also foreign partners who are also giving a lot to doing this have also been part of, you know, trying to put in the foundation and the fundamental understanding of what politics is. We have a long way to go, I'll be very honest. But are we seeing changes? Yes, we are. Are we going to get Nigeria right in the next cycle of elections? I doubt that very much. But over the course of time, I believe that things like this will become mainstay in Nigeria's political process. Now let's go back to the NOA and INEC. I always thought that INEC would, you know, put in a lot more into, you know, the system, and maybe even its ad hoc staff, and maybe even its residential electoral commissioners, who are of course appointed by the president. But we've not seen any of that. The NOA has offices in 774 local governments. I'm very surprised. I think the NOA is one of the strongest tools if used managed properly by the right person. It's not been managed properly. They usually complain of funds, but I don't think the NOA needs funds to do what it wants to do. People like us started without grants, and we were able to affect, and we still don't run on grants, which means we're able to affect and change the game the way we deemed fit, because we had a passion for a country more than we were thinking of, you know, money to do something. For me, I think if the NOA maybe under this government is being utilized by or given to the right person, they actually could make significant change, because they're key. Their access to media and what they can get the media to print out, and then, you know, the access to local governments, and, you know, the kind of visions everybody wants to have, be able to teach this political literacy under trees, you know, under moonlight, be able to get the people to know exactly what to do. I think that will be good. I feel another big anomaly will be what we call the middle class. And the middle class here, I wouldn't say as according to economy, I would say use according to those that can read and write. Now, those that can read and write, if you send them the Electoral Act, you send them any political literature, most of them don't look at it. In their concept now, we're happy. They have more than 2 political parties as of this election. So for them now, it's 3. You know, they are 18. Come on, help me. But
at the point they were 90.
No, I don't want to remember 2019 because I remember I participated in the election, and
I mean, even the size of the ballot was problematic.
No, I don't know how that happened. So the middle class here, who's those that can read and write, they're not actually putting forward, you know, we're making an effort. They assume the grassroots is the problem, but I always ask, who's the conduit when politicians are transferring cash from the elites to the grassroots? The conduit is that same set. They say political parties have no ideology. Who wrote the party constitutions? That same set
of people.
So I believe the middle class are, of course, the most politically reckless people in Nigeria, and there should be less focus for me. I've told everyone that we're working with that we will be concentrating between 2023 and 2027 on that set and trying to educate them. They're hard to educate. One, they know they've gone to school, which is a big problem.
So which means that they believe they know. So there's nothing you are going to teach them.
That's
which
where
in
the
itself
problem
is
lies.
Yeah, which is really a problem.
Yes, that's where the problem lies. But we'll be trying to attempt to do quite a lot more with them. We've decided maybe to infuse this into film, into music too. We're talking with Nollywood. We are on talks with, you know, a few other things to infuse subtle, you know, conversations which could trigger, you know, a whole national orientation. But I hope we have the power to do this, and I hope whoever is being picked to head anyway would officially love to work around this.
Now, so if we come to the 2023 elections themselves, you were with us in the course of coverage of the elections proper, both 25th of February and then 18th of March, and then, you know, the supplementary elections that followed. I must ask you that given the background you've given and that we've talked about, did it come to you as a surprise that the election turned out the way it did?
Uh, if I remember, the morning of the presidential elections, one of the first things I said was that this probably will be Nigeria's lowest turnout in an election. I was praying deep down inside that that would not happen, but that was the case. There's been a dip from the 50% we achieved in 2015 till now. It's been a massive dip. I expected quite, a more robust electorate participation within the lower offices. I've always known that, and I said that earlier, that the presidential would be a well thought out race. This is the first time that the gap between the presidential candidates, top three, was very highly negligible. It's not happened before. Yeah, before you just have two big guys on top,
And then
15 million,
else,
13 million, and
then
everybody else at 100,000. But now we had 8 million, 6 million, 6 billion. That's very, very new. I would say I was happy about that. I also say, looking at Nigeria's electoral violence, this is the safest election we've had. I know a lot of people want to say, yeah, scream bull murder, but first and foremost, they have no idea what Nigerian elections were in violence
before
preceding
2023.
If you look at the stats, it will tell you that this was the safest. Yes, I'm not saying it's the best. It doesn't make it the most credible, but it means that at least something is turning. At least the wheels are turning forward, which are getting better. One of the key things I think we should look at, and I think I said it that day on air, is that I think Nigeria should consider staggering its elections. I don't think we're able to handle elections straight 36 because of our manpower security-wise. We discussed it that day.
Yes,
400,000 law enforcement across the entire 280 square meters of Nigeria. That doesn't make much sense. Over 177,000 polling units. You virtually have 2 people to a polling unit. And
even at that, even at 2 people to, there were some polling units that had only one. There were some that didn't have any.
So because, yes, of course, some have to be with VIPs. Remember, some have to guard the presidential candidates, some have to guard the senatorial. It's
it's complicated.
So I've always believed, and I think, and this is preempting you, one of the first solutions, which I mentioned that day, which I'm fully behind it, is I think we should stagger our general elections. And this is because of the manpower. We can pick one state per region and say this is how it plays as of now. Next day, we can stagger that way.
But don't you have a fear that there will be a domino effect? Because that's part of the reason why they say that it should all happen. You remember that, I mean, when we watch football, when they say, there are 2 semifinals, they want them played at exactly the same time because they don't want anybody to have an advantage.
The truth is, if you look at countries with our population, these elections are staggered. One of the key things I think we should start looking at is when e-election is being mentioned in Nigeria, we always get to frown. And, it's easy to trust someone with *7 whatever, with your entire net worth, but you cannot trust with 1 vote. So I find that totally hypocritical. So even if we say we can't take on e-elections for everyone, we can pick Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Calabar, Kidnap, Kano, Sokoto, then Nigerians in diaspora. They will go E, and the rest of them will vote simply. I believe that will even help massively reduce the strength, the weight on security forces. These are things that INEC, and these are conversations we plan to put forward. These are conversations we believe the National Assembly should start to get interested in. I don't think any election is worth any Nigerian life. It's cost us quite lives, property, voter suppression, a lot of massive things, which I think can be avoided eventually.
But if you take a look at it, I'm sorry to cut in, but if you take a look at it, there are those who say that all of this might be feasible, provided those who are going to manage the electoral process themselves have engendered trust. Now, in the case of INEC, the seeming consensus seems to have been that they overpromised and underdelivered in this particular electoral circle. And that in itself has a problem because that now puts the spotlight on those within INEC who are managing the electoral process. We were still trying to chew over the issue of the under-delivery, particularly as related to beavers and the upload of results on time, when the Adamawad crisis then erupted, and up till now, till today, there's still parts of that story that either don't seem to make sense or there are gaps in it that one does not seem to completely understand. We all witnessed it as it unfolded, but one is wondering, does it then mean that perhaps we, as part of the advocacy you mentioned, we need to go back to, first of all, who is going to be in INEC? Because as the law currently stands, it doesn't seem as if there is a lot of criteria to determine who can be appointed to be INEC chair or a resident electoral commissioner or something like that, other than the very basics. There are no real criteria that will ensure that fair, objective, conscionable people are put in those positions.
I think with every thing that we've wanted to achieve in Nigeria, the biggest problem with the criteria we use in appointing people has always been more of a demand of maybe his educational qualifications than rather his managerial qualifications. And managerial qualifications have nothing to do with whether you went to Harvard or you're a professor. Secondly, there's a little critical problem. So the INEC remains under the purview of the National Assembly, but the president appoints
the INEC chair and the recs.
And as long as the president appoints the INEC chair and the recs, as much as he acts totally democratic as he wants to be, it's a clash of interests, because the president is going to probably at one point be running re-election, and people he appointed, of course, would, it's not hard to figure. So the point now is, why isn't the INEC chair maybe even elected? Why isn't the INEC chair a pool was being taken and then 4 are being brought in front of the National Assembly, which is televised publicly, and then everybody can get feelers of who exactly would be? I think you have to even explain what the process is you attempt to. You can't spend 100 billion on IREV and tell me there's a mistake. It's goddamn too much money. I don't think any bank in Nigeria, even though banks give their hiccups, but I don't think any bank has spent 100 billion on their back-end servers. And we've spent that kind of money, and we've made those kind of statements. In the end, if you even ask them the individual processes, the chairman of INEC cannot explain it. And this is where, and the spokesman too has done a poor job at trying to explain the step-by-step process of how the IREV was to work. So it gets you asking the question that maybe we have a systematic problem in appointing these people, and also a managerial problem when they are appointed. So these are 2 points at which we do not seem to get things right properly. And let's also remember, if we are to go to the top of the problem, first and foremost, the president also appoints the Attorney General. How independent can INEC be? I'll just leave it at that.
But that then brings up another thing, which perhaps is a lesson that others, you've referenced the fact that, you can look at what happens in other places. And worldwide, the biggest democratic experiment that happens, every 4 or 5 years is the one in India, where they have 900 million to 1 billion voters, and that election takes place over 6 weeks or something like that, and things like donkeys and camels, depending on where the people are used for transportation and all of that. And they've been doing this for decades. And I can't recollect reading anywhere about disputes about the results. So there's something they are doing right. The other day, I don't know if you were with us when one of the election observers from Ghana was telling us about the Ghanaian electoral process and the fact that when election materials arrive in a particular locality, they are put in the local police station and everybody signs on to the padlock and so on. Most of us in the studios laughed because we couldn't picture a Nigerian police station where anybody would want to keep anything. So I'm wondering if devolving, because right now INEC is statutorily, empowered for this. But if we, devolve it down, like some point to the United States, where elections are conducted at county level by county officials and all of that, that maybe some of the problems we've identified so far may also disappear of their own accord because the election is taking place in so many places at once.
I don't agree. And this is where the problem is. So INEC as an agency or as a body has devolved local government elections. I don't want to explain what I have seen in state electoral commissions. The most shocking, Oshun, where other parties were not allowed to participate, and there was a paper, and then the ruling party was APC. There was a paper, APC, and then yes or no. That is the worst and closest.
And that was conducted by a state electoral
commission. That's the closest to Idi Amin I have seen in my lifetime. For me, that was outright dictatorship. And this is because it was brought down to... So Nigerians are not ready for a few things, and I kind of understand that. We're not there yet. I've had the opportunity of sitting down in Dakar and watching someone with some ballots, riding the bicycle with the ballots, this thing behind, and people were cheering him. And I was like, Giant of Africa, help me. I said, that cannot happen in Nigeria. It can't happen. So I feel first we've first destroyed the culture of meritocracy in Nigeria, and because of that, we do not take pride in a lot of things. If we devolve these systems, we will be having a larger problem than we can imagine, especially with the strength that we're giving the kings of states. And I call them kings because Constitution grants them so much power and they've usurped so much more. And, I can't imagine, just imagine. No offense, I know I'm on TV, but there's the particular Donald Trump of the South. Do you think anything will go not his way in a state? It won't happen. And for me, I think that won't change the way things actually go in Nigeria.
Let's look at the political parties, because part of our conversation today, as many would have guessed now, is the lessons from all of this. Let's look at the political parties. I referenced them a bit earlier when I talked about them being the vehicles for power. It seems that maybe it speaks to the literacy you mentioned earlier, but it seems as if the political parties get away with a lot. Nobody holds them to account for much, other than when they present, a flawed candidate, and perhaps not even then. We don't know what their membership is like. I remember having one of them in the chair you're sitting here now, who said, well, look, let me tell you, there's no political party in Nigeria that can tell you it has a valid membership register. Now, that would not come as a shock to many people who were listening. We don't know anything about their accounts. We don't know what they do between election cycles, about voter awareness, voter education, civic education, and all of that. We don't know if they do anything, and if so, to whom they are doing it, if there's a plan surrounding all that. Now, and I think people sometimes just throw it away and say it has to do with the ideology that you talked about, which you have now debunked, because perhaps it has nothing to do with that. So why are we allowing the political parties to get away with so much, cycle after cycle after cycle?
First, the Electoral Act is clear with quite a lot. The abuse of 77.3, which is even parties, language, nepotism, it's an abuse. The Electoral Act covers everything. There's one error. Who is to prosecute? INEC cannot prosecute. If EFCC carries it to court, they don't have jurisdiction. If anybody else carries it to court, everybody else doesn't have jurisdiction, because law clearly does not state that. And I think it was a trick by the National Assembly to ensure that the party continues. They have the law now, the party continues. Political parties are mandated by the Electoral Act to submit their register, physical. And I can tell you that no political party met that criteria. There's what INEC would like to say to cover itself, but no political, because I also know that no political party knows exactly how many members it has. And the shocking part also is that I can also tell you that no political party has more than 200,000 is high. Paying dues, paying members. It's not certainly not possible.
But we have large figures at primaries.
Those figures are falsified, and we all know that. Let me be honest. If you want to really find out what political parties are worth in Nigeria, let all of them hold their primaries at the same time on the same day in different locations. I assure you, you will not have up to 5,000 people in one place.
Some people listening to you will say that's a wicked suggestion.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not a wicked suggestion. It's just to open the truth, because the Electoral College Nigeria was part of a lot of primaries, APC, PDP. We were on ground throughout, and I'll be honest, I saw the same faces. I know this sounds kind of funny, but
no, but other people have said the same thing you're saying now.
I saw the same faces. So it's like, okay, the delegates here.
It's like what happens with rallies.
Yes, rallies. It's the same faces. There are people that will come out for Peter Obi, and people that will come out for Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and the same people that will come out for Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. And you have the same situation. So in the end, you ask yourself, what exactly are these parties doing? But now, looking at the Electoral Act, the Constitution, and what they are supposed to do, parties, like right now, I assure you, sir, if you join a political party now, you can become a chairman undercover before 2025. Because right now, everybody's, apart from the party that has taken power in a state or federally, if you're in a party that doesn't have power, they have all been injected with, I don't know, cyanide or something. They're sleeping till elections. So they're dull. You can enter now, do some small work, and penetrate any political party. That shows that there's no particular structure within political parties. How people ascend, become chairman, become this, become that, is totally a give or take, money here, take care of this, take care of that. So when the political parties don't exactly know what they're doing, and they're not held by law, and even their finances are not being controlled. Now, it's not only the finances of those running for office, finances of political parties are not even being controlled. You have a PDP diaspora, you have an APC diaspora. Would they say they did not give money? Meanwhile, law clearly states
that you can't
no
receive.
party can receive. Candidates can, but parties cannot receive money from the diaspora. But yet they flag diaspora membership. And we joke a lot in this country, I think.
But okay, now, if we say the electoral process is over, a lot of litigation is going on. In fact, in some instances, there's still litigation from even before the election. The primaries that you referenced, that Electoral College Nigeria was a part of, was on ground to see many of. There's a lot of litigation still going on about whether the person who went on to participate in the election was actually the correct candidate. Right up until the eve of the presidential election and the National Assembly election, names of candidates were still changing because courts were still giving judgments as to whether or not this was the right person or not. There are a number of those cases that are still in court, even as you and I are speaking, and we are now counting down to the inauguration. Put those on one side. Then there are the litigations that have come out of the elections themselves. Do you think it's reasonable to suggest or perhaps expect that all such litigations actually, and I'm not talking about for this cycle now, I'm talking about as part of electoral reforms to come, should actually end before the new political office holders take office?
So I'm going to separate them into pre-election and post-election matters. So for pre-election matters, I believe 3 months after a primaries, there shouldn't be a problem. First and foremost, I feel the issues with primaries lies mostly on INEC than it is. The hustle for power is always not an easy thing in any country. Power is I don't know, it's a blood, sweat, and tears thing. It's man just goes berserk over it. But INEC can only be in one place at one time if it's listening to only one chairman. So if there's one chairman, it's here. How can INEC watch a primaries and it still can be flawed? How does INEC attend factional primaries on a particular post, which are done in 6 places for the same position? INEC must be complicit. This is not maybe. INEC must be complicit, because if you look at it, how are these things happening? If INEC comes back and says, this is the person that won, and of course the same person that chairman assigned as won, this is not a conversation. But when you have INEC there, people breaking processes. My time in COA, when I was National Public Secretary of COA in 2018, there was a primaries in Ekiti. And it was the Ekiti gubernatorial, and it was in our party. And I was head of delegation at a very young age for that, for the National Executive Council for that primaries. And I remember cancelling the primaries because one candidate, was an aspirant, decided to start registering members and giving them membership cards the day of the primaries. How can you join the party the day of the primaries? So I wrote off the primaries. A gun was pulled out. I had to be my hotel room was changed 3 or 4 times before I left there. And this was a very funny thing. But the real question is, how can INEC be there and these kind of things happen? People are registering. You cancel the entire primaries. Then ask the chairman of the party to call up a new one. We clear dedicated people that have paid dues for more than 4 months. And this must be tabulated. But the problem is that INEC is not holding anybody accountable. INEC will say it's short-man staffed to do this. Okay, you're short-man staffed to do this. Why don't you decide to say, okay, let's work intelligently. We will send this particular CSO as our emissaries on this. Whatever they report, we will take as ours. They're standing for us. And they could have a faster job done. This is not about money. This is not about pick a CSO in the location, so it costs them virtually nothing. And then this could help. You know, we're looking at 2027. This could help validate primaries. We don't need to be solving. Which country solves primary matters, which is pre-election matters, post an election? Nobody. We're still in court over primaries of a lot of people till now. It's a serious situation I think we need to look into.
Now, even as we talk about the elections and we do a post-mortem of them, we're also looking ahead, which is why you talked about, somewhat preempting me when you mentioned recommendations. But now I want to come to that, because a lot of people who are listening to us will ask the question, okay, having gone through all this, the various observations, what we've noted about the process this time around, it is now how to improve it. There are another set of elections coming in November this year at the state level. There are 3 states that are expecting that they will do elections at that time. So, again, we're going to go through this quote-unquote circus at that point.
The circus has already started because in Kogi, they're in court over the APC primary. So they've
already
started the circus.
So the circus has started already. Now, in that kind of situation, for the new administration, and I'm happy you mentioned the issue of advocacy that you'd be pursuing, but you won't be doing it by yourself, I mean, along with other civil society groups that you mentioned and so on. If you were told to identify 3 key things that need to change almost immediately ahead of that election coming in November and possibly others that are off-circle elections before the next general election is due, what would they be?
First, I would say the Electoral Act needs to be followed to the latter, fully to the latter, and prosecution must happen immediately. We don't want to see arrests. We don't want to see these persons were cordoned for whatever. This should happen immediately. The reason why we have pre-election matters in Nigeria is because nobody does anything about the laws. Secondly, I would say an attempt should be made. I believe there should be a local government election preceding November, and even if not for November, by next year there should be a local government election. I believe we should start testing the elections, and INEC should mandate state electoral commissions to test. 1, to improve voter involvement. Then 3, I think we should stop these shenanigans we are doing with PVC. I believe we must merge our databases, BVN, PVC, driver's license, and immigrations. Once we merge that, we should have maybe your voter's card, just bringing out your immigration, this thing can help access your voter's card, and it can create one simultaneously for you to vote. I think we should stop the lies we tell ourselves by INEC having its own database. This one is not aligned for cohesion of information. Till we pull our information together, we might not be able to get what exactly we're going to do. Then we need to find out immediately who exactly can prosecute on campaign funding. There are limits to these campaign funds, but we've seen that. I can tell you that most people that they consider candidates have already exhausted their campaign finance by now because they survived the primaries. For you to survive the primaries in Nigeria,
But nobody's following, nobody seems to be following those figures.
no, so a few of us have looked at some of them and we've tried to quantify what these figures are. And, you know, just from the top of it, giving 200 cars to village heads. Okay, let's say the cars are 3 million. They're not 3 million. 3 times 200 is 600 million. Okay.
Yeah, and then of course you have, you have the hiring of private jets, you know, and so on.
And in the end, we know you've exhausted.
But nobody's taking them up on this. So that's what you talk about when you mention enforcement.
Enforcement. So we don't have enforcement. What we have is we have these laws, and they're written there, and I think it makes us feel good looking at the laws that we have them, and then we can't use them. I feel that's worse than even having the laws.
In the case of civil society, some of those I had spoken to in the run-up to the election had talked about the fact that the civil society organizations had a lot of ideas. In fact, a lot of the things that were imputed into the Electoral Act, into the guidelines that INEC produced for the elections and so on, many of those ideas came from civil society engagement with the process and with the organizations involved. And in that kind of situation, there were those who then said, look, if the civil society organizations are doing this much, shouldn't there be some kind of framework in which they are an established part of the process in such a way that they don't contribute these ideas ad hoc? They make actual contributions on the basis of an established framework during which or through which those ideas can be examined in depth, can be put out for analysis, and when adopted, can be followed through to a logical conclusion. What do you make of that?
There's always this war between politicians and the civil service. I don't know how it started. I'm torn in between as someone who played politics and then the CSO. So sometimes I'm on this bridge, sometimes I'm on the other bridge, and it's but what I haven't seen is a thirst for wanting to do the right thing by those in power, because it's not nuclear physics. Why can't you appoint the INEC chairman from one of these guys that's always talking about, inclusion, advocacy, talking about the way the system should be in politics? Why don't you appoint an INEC chairman from there? Why don't you appoint a director of a DG of NWA from someone who has always said, okay, we love this country more than anything. He's always tried to impute the national ethics, or she has always tried to impute national ethics and integrity. So I feel because this doesn't happen, and the government naturally thinks, I don't know who taught them that CSOs dislike the government. So they've gone to war at each other, and I think this at the peak was during NSAS, where they both went against each other, and since then it's been a dog-eat-dog world. So I think if we all understand that we could have a government that is unilateral, and this is someone who, of course, has worked for a name, especially within the CSO space. A lot of us have tried to put our names, and try to run things as normal. We have a name. We have a higher embarrassment level than the quite unimaginable.
The ones who are hiding behind faceless platforms.
Well, yeah. So I think that they could be put to the fore and tested with develop a system. And I don't know why the government doesn't do this. Come, you guys, sit down together. Sit down in a closed room for 1 week. Develop a system in which Nigeria can vote smoother, considering our problems. And then we'll come up with that, and then start to work on that and, get these approvals. Nigeria has never lacked the brains. Nigeria has never lacked the manpower or willpower or finance to do anything. What Nigeria has lacked is to just do something other than what has been done. And that's where the problem is.
I can't let you go without, when we talked about the faceless platforms, it just reminded me of something that was a feature of this electoral process, which didn't assume such a prominence with previous electoral circles, which is social media, online media. again, the reaction to its emergence was mixed, depending on where you were. A lot of people, however, got most of their information from such platforms. Do you think, of course, it's obvious that going forward, we're going to get more, not less of this. But do you think that it played a salutary role in 2023? And how do we curb some of its more negative progeny, if you like, going forward?
I think we need to first, social media has done a lot of good, but it doesn't mean it hasn't done a lot of bad. So it depends on who exactly used it. I think Nigeria should push forward an agenda which makes clear that there's freedom of speech, but your freedom of speech is totally limited to where it infringes on another person's rights. There was misinformation, there was nepotism, there was religious vagabond behavior. It was crazy. I'm not going to say they weren't beautiful things. We were able to drive people to get to vote, drive people to start to ask questions. The Electoral College was able to train about 5,000 virtually. There were gains, but there were also losses.
One can only hope that most of what you've said, those who should take it on board and act upon it, are listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. That's our program today. We would, of course, like to hear from you on the conversation. Our social media handles are right there on your screen. You can also listen to this and watch previous episodes of the program via our podcast and YouTube pages. Please visit our website, channelstv.com, to get started. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Goodbye.